Chapter 13 The Frozen Waterfall. And that is the way the beautiful wicked witch found her when she came merrily singing back into the forest. Hepatica heard her song and looked up through her tears. It is a strange thing how very plainly she could see the beautiful wicked witch through tears. She stood there, gowned and crowned in glistening tears, as it were. She had never been so perfectly beautiful. "Well, Hepatica," she said, laughing, "they got the little fellow, I see. He will be buried in those cozy stony castles of theirs for many winters, and summers too, perhaps. Why aren't you running to tell the others the news? Tree Mother will get him away from those screaming creatures," cried Hepatica, standing up and looking defiantly into the witch's face. But the witch only laughed. "Who has seen Tree Mother for ever so long? Did she stop me from singing my little song about you all summer? Yes, and making people believe it too. Did she even stop the snow witches from carrying off her darling littlest forest child? Oh, there's no fear of Tree Mother, so run along, little fire spit. Spread the news through the forest. Where are the witches' castles? Tell me that," pleaded Hepatica. "Ho, ho, you would play Tree Mother, would you? And please, why should I help you in that game?" "Oh, don't tell me then. Cloud and I will find them well enough." But the beautiful wicked witch wanted nothing better than to tell Hepatica the way to those cold, far places. Once Hepatica started on that way in search of the little boy, she would not soon trouble the forest again. The witch was sure of that, but she must tease her a little first. "You can see me well enough today, little girl," she said sneeringly. "How is that?" "That is because I am crying," answered Hepatica. "My tears make you seem real." At those words the witch was silent, for Hepatica was wiser than she had thought, and Hepatica too was silent after that, for it was the forest that had spoken through her and surprised her. She was silent to hear what more it might say, but nothing more came. So she turned away from the witch and started off as well as she could through the trees to find Cloud. The witch, however, did not mean to let her go without telling her the dangerous way to the stone castles, and shouted after her, "Follow the brook right up to its source, and there you will find the castles, but Cloud won't go with you. Wind creatures know what the castles are like. Goodbye, Hepatica." Hepatica went calling and searching for her playmate through the forest. No one had seen him. No one could tell her where he was, and because she could not keep the tears from her eyes, it was a long time before she found him. At last she came upon Cloud, sliding alone on a frozen pool deep in the forest. He came flying towards Hepatica across the blue ice, his purple wings outstretched to catch the wind. But he stopped still when he saw that his playmate was crying. She told him all her tale in a breath, and he was as grieved as she, for the littlest forest child is dear to all the forest people. "The witch said that you would not go with me." "Oh, the witch, she thinks like that." Cloud tossed his head, his purple eyes flashing. "Let us start at once." It was well for Hepatica that she had on the wonderful sandals that Cloud had made her. If the beautiful wicked witch had noticed those sandals, perhaps she would have not been so eager to tell Hepatica the way. And it was well for Hepatica too that she had Tree Mother's robe about her shoulders, for it had stopped snowing now and was turning bitterly cold. The tree girl had closed her door and windows and was telling stories to some forest children by her fire. The wind creatures were drawn together under the low boughs of a fir to wait for sunshine and the glad wind. Even the beautiful wicked witch was at home among her cages, dancing before her mirrors and pretending that she was real. Only Hepatica and Cloud were out in the cold, gray weather, following the bank of the brook, determined to follow it to its very beginning. If only a wind would come up to blow us along, wished Cloud. Or if it weren't all the way uphill, sighed Hepatica. But they kept bravely on until it was dark, and even then they did not stop, but took hands and hurried along over the roots of trees, through frozen bushes and little snowdrifts, stumbling and falling many times, but keeping to the bank of the brook. Oh, the beautiful witch knew very well that that was a long and difficult journey for a human child to take. What she had not counted on, however, was Cloud's going with Hepatica. The beautiful wicked witch does not understand about comradeship. She did not understand how the happy free wind creatures dread the cold, dark recesses of the forest and the piercing voices of the snow witches. But in spite of his dread and the unknown way, Cloud was Hepatica's comrade, and he stayed with her. More than that, he drew her along by a path she could never have taken alone, over ragged tree roots, under dark branches, always up, towards the source of the forest brook. At last, the night was too black for even Cloud to travel farther. "We must wait here until morning," he said. "You tell me a story, Hepatica, and then we won't think so much about strangeness all around us." So they sat down where they were, their backs to a dark tree, to wait for the daylight, but Hepatica had hardly begun her story before she fell asleep, leaning against Cloud's soft wing, with Tree Mother's cloak folding her about like summer, and soon Cloud, too, slept as comfortably as though he were swaying in the tip of one of his familiar trees, holding tight to Hepatica's hand. They did not stir until dawn. Then they woke, glad to find themselves together so early in the morning. They laughed, but at once grew serious when they remembered their quest, and now they found by daylight that they had neared the end of their journey. Ahead of them was a steep, rocky cliff, and the brook ran down its face. It was frozen now and lay over the rocky ledge like a banner of crystal. "These rocks are the Snow Witch's castles, Hepatica. What shall we do? Even if we can find a door and get in, how are we to take the littlest forest child away from them?" Now, all the while that Hepatica had been asleep, the forest had been thinking through her. What she said were echoes of those wise thoughts. "You must stay here, Cloud. I will go to find the door alone. It was I who let the witches get him, and so it must be I who free him. You spend the time I'm gone in making a sled. Make it as shining and as beautiful as you made my sandals, and make it swift too. Make it of fir bows." Cloud looked at her with wondering eyes. "You sound exactly like Tree Mother," he said. "You are the strangest human." And so it was that Hepatica went hunting for a door into the blank-faced castles alone. She crept in under the frozen waterfall to see if the way might be there. She saw no door, but she did find a narrow frozen ladder. She climbed it, her hands aching with the cold. At the top she found herself standing among lichen-covered boulders. She wandered about among them looking for a door. Perhaps one entered the witches' castles from above through a door in the roof. So thinking, she came around one rock more huge than the others, and there she found a little frozen spring. It was the source of the forest brook. And sitting dejectedly by it, cross-legged and alone, sat the littlest forest child. His red gold curls were so silvered with the frost that at first she did not know him. His face was wan and miserable. He heard her step and lifted his head. Hepatica bent down to him with a glad cry. Then she saw that his eyelashes were glued together with frozen tears, and that he could not see her at all. But he knew her voice, and reached up his arms to her. She gathered him up in them and hugged and kissed him, trying to wipe the frozen tears from between his eyelashes. But it did no good, and he would only whisper as he snuggled closer and closer, "Oh, take me home, Hepatica, take me home to Tree Mother." How was she to get him down the steep, slippery ladder if he could not see to help himself? Even as she wondered, she heard far cries, and laughter that pierced her ears like the cold. "They are coming back," cried the forest child. "Oh, hurry, or they will not let you take me." Hepatica held him very tightly then, and ran hunting for the ladder top. She could hear the witch's cries coming closer when, in her wild search, she came to the top of the hill and the frosty rock that the stream hung over. Before her she saw the whole forest roof slanting away and down to the open aisles where the happy forest people lived. Well, she had trusted that roof before. She could trust it now. She held the littlest forest child tight and jumped out and down. A kind fir caught her and let her gently down a long snowy slide to the ground below. She would have tumbled directly on Cloud's head if he had not looked up just in time to see why the snow was sliding, and jumped out of the way. When he saw the forest child in Hepatica's arms, he danced for joy, a wild, beautiful dance, with lifted wings, sometimes off the ground, sometimes on it. He danced until Hepatica pointed to the forest child's closed eyes, and then he stood still, greatly troubled. But Hepatica did not rest. She pulled Tree Mother's cloak from her shoulders and wrapped the forest child warmly in it. Then she looked to see how Cloud was getting on with his sled. It was not half made, for there had not been time, so she set to work under his direction with cold, numb fingers. Both children worked busily, but often their eyes turned to the forest child's closed eyes wonderingly. "Where are we?" he asked them. "Far from home, but we are making a sled to carry you. Why can't I see you? Your eyelashes are frozen, but the sun will surely mend that soon." They worked on with flying fingers. "Are you still there, Hepatica?" At that, the little human had to drop her work and run to hug and kiss the littlest forest child. "This cloak is so warm it feels like summer now." Hepatica and Cloud smiled at each other. "You were right to wear Tree Mother's cloak that you found," said Cloud. "She will be glad enough you had it now." Hepatica thought so too, but in the midst of their work and growing content, a sudden cry came piercing their ears like the cold. "Where are you, littlest forest child? Where have you wandered to with your frozen eyes? We have brought you toys from far places, glistening icicles and frozen spray. We have come back to give them to you. The witches, whispered the children. And then, although the witches did not see them down under the protecting arms of the giant fir, they saw the witches plainly enough, leaning out over the frozen waterfall, their long white hair cutting the wind, looking and calling for the child they had lost. Hepatica and Cloud held him close and huddled, hardly breathing under the bending branches. Chapter 14. Tree Mother Returns. At night, when the littlest forest child did not come home, the other forest children wondered why, and took their trouble to Tree Man. Little troubles they always took to the Tree Girl, but this was a terrible thing, that the littlest and dearest of them all should be lost in the cold and dark. Tree Man was sitting by his fire, carving his toys, but he put aside his knife, his wood, and the half-finished toy he was making when all the forest children came tumbling in at the door, crying, "Where is the littlest forest child? He is lost in the forest, he is gone." The Tree Girl came running, full of sorrowful questions. "Where did you last see him?" "He went off to play by himself. That's a way he was, you know." Then Hepatica came along looking for him. She went on to find him. He hasn't come back since. Then the old Tree Man spoke. "Go find Hepatica. She may help us." But where to find Hepatica? In a cage in the beautiful Wicked Witch's tree. "Go and see," was the strange command of the Tree Man. He knew that the beautiful Wicked Witch was no match for those innocent, curly-headed children, because she was not as real as they, and one must be real after all to do much, so he had no fear for the children. As for them, they never thought of disobeying him. They only waited for the Tree Girl to slip into her gleaming winter cloak, and they were off to the witch's fir. The shy Tree Girl led the way. It was a quiet group of children that at last stood in the cold and dark before the witch's high, narrow door with its frozen wreath of flowers. They knew the way to summon her, for the child who had once been caged there had told them all the wonders of the place. They had but to set the door swinging with their fingertips for myriad little songful bells to go ringing through the tree. They touched the door now, and it swung softly inward to the tinkling of the bells. Instantly they heard the quick, light footfalls of the beautiful Wicked Witch running down her spiral staircase. She pulled the door wide open and stood there with a little yellow light cupped like a flower in her hand. Her dark eyes were mirthful. "Who is there I cannot see in the dark?" The Tree Girl spoke. "It is I, the Tree Girl, and all the forest children. We want to speak to Hepatica." The beautiful Wicked Witch laughed, and her laugh was more tinkling and gleeful than the bells. "You cannot speak to Hepatica. She is asleep in her cage, and I will not wake her. She did good work today, and has earned her sleep. She captured the littlest forest child for me. He has the prettiest cage in my house." The children behind the Tree Girl neither moved nor spoke. Their dismay and sorrow was too great. But the Tree Girl, the shy Tree Girl, lifted her head bravely and said, "Let me in to see for myself. Unless I can see him there in a cage, how shall I believe you?" "Oh no," said the witch, with dancing laughter. "There's no need to see. You believe everything Tree Mother says, don't you? And many of you have never even seen her, much less the things she talks about." Now it was the Tree Girl's turn to laugh. "But Tree Mother," she cried, "is real, and you, why, you aren't so real as I am. Father says so." At that, the beautiful wicked witch became very angry and slammed her door in their faces. There was nothing for them to do but to go home and tell the Tree Man how they had failed. They found him sitting musing and told their tale. Some of them were sobbing, and the oldest one, who had sometimes teased the littlest child, was crying bitterly, his face in the crook of his arm. The Tree Man took him onto his knee. "Do not cry so, little fellow," he said quietly. "We will surely find him. I have sent for Tree Mother." At those words the children grew round-eyed and still, and a light of hope shone on all their little upturned faces. I could not find Cloud, the swiftest messenger, but I sent another wind creature. He is to fly straight away over the world until he finds her. Then he will tell her that the littlest and dearest is lost. She will come speedily. "She will come," cried the shy tree girl. "She will find him for us, and then she will help find Hepatica too, and send her away out of our forest." "Hepatica, who stole the littlest and dearest," murmured the children. But even as they spoke, the door swung open, and Tree Mother stood among them in the firelight. She was gowned in a sky-blue robe, and her floating, beautiful hair was all aglimmer with sweet-smelling yellow flowers. The room suddenly felt like summer, and smelled like it too, and the fire no longer needed quenched its own light. By Tree Mother stood Wild Star, the wind creature who had been sent for her, and all the other wind creatures except Cloud, of course, stood with their purple wings folded and stilled in the open doorway. Tree Mother's first words amazed everyone there except the Tree Man. "Where is Hepatica?" she asked, looking about for the little human. "She is asleep." "She is asleep in a cage of the beautiful wicked witches," said the tree girl, and all the forest children echoed, "In a cage of the beautiful wicked witches. She is there asleep." Tree Mother grew strangely grave. "How do you know that? Have you been to see? The witch herself has told us, and this is the song she goes singing about it." All the forest children sang softly and scornfully. "Hepatica is no forest child. She is a human. I caught her asleep at the edge of the wood, and caged her. All night she must sleep in my golden cage, high in the tree, but by daylight she goes free." Tree Mother looked off over the heads of the wind creatures in the doorway to the night sky while they sang. She was asking a question of the forest, but there was no need to. Speak it aloud, for the forest heard her thoughts. When she had done listening to the forest, she turned to the children and asked, "But what does the littlest forest child sing? Tell me that." The biggest one began to sob again on Tree Man's knee. The tree girl answered, "He is lost, and we cannot find him." "Yes, I know, but before he was lost, what did he sing about Hepatica?" The forest children sang again, this time the littlest one's song that they had so often mocked. "Tree Mother is her mother," my dream said, but I had known it all along. No cage could hold her, no one could hurt her, no witch could charm her. Tree Mother is too strong. She guards her children, she shines through her children. Hepatica's her little daughter, I have known it all along. Now Tree Mother was smiling. Her smile made a warm gladness in the room. There were no more tears, because Tree Mother was here and they had told her all. They were eased of their trouble. They were no longer afraid. She would take care of them and find the littlest one. They remembered to be sleepy at last. Their curly heads were nodding. Tree Mother smiled at the Tree Man. Little sleepy heads, she said softly, and took them all into her arms. Before their drowsy little heads had reached her bosom, they were fast asleep, nestled in the heart of summer. Even the wind creatures slept, pillowed on their purple wings in the starshine by the open door. Tree Mother spoke softly to Tree Man. I will take them home now and tuck them into their beds. They will have forgotten their tears in the morning. Then by sunlight we shall find our lost children. He nodded assent, and the glorious woman passed from the room like summer, the children asleep in her arms. Chapter 15. Winter Morning. But what had become of Cloud and Hepatica and the littlest forest child, huddled under the fir away up in the high cold recesses of the forest? When they saw the snow witches leaning out over the frozen waterfall and looking for them in every direction, they almost lost hope. But the forest spoke through the bending boughs of the fir to Hepatica. Go on with the building of the sled. Yes, you are in danger. The snow witches may spy you at any minute, but you must learn to work on even in danger. You need the sled to carry the littlest forest child to safety. So keep quiet thoughts and skillful fingers and work on. After the forest had spoken those wise words to Hepatica, she whispered in Cloud's ear, we must finish the sled. And she began working again with her cold, numb fingers. Cloud looked at her in amazement, but she did not look back. She was too busy with her weaving and tying. Cloud looked up once again at the peering, calling witches. Where are you, littlest forest child? Where have you wandered to with your frozen eyes? See, we have brought you toys from far places, lovely glittering icicles and frozen spray. We have come to play with you. Cloud shuddered, but Hepatica never heeded. And the littlest forest child had no fear at all, so long as he could keep his head on Hepatica's knee. So Cloud, a little ashamed of his terror, went back to the building of the sled. As he worked, the snow witches' high voices pierced his ears less and less keenly. Indeed, other, softer voices soon took their place. These were the voices of the forest whispering, Courage, children, courage. Build on. Do not take time to be afraid. And soon the sled was done. A beautiful, shining sled, made to go swiftly. The children looked up for the snow witches, but they had flown off long ago, and their shrill calling had quite died away. How glad the children were then, and how joyfully they started on the homeward journey. Going home was a different business from what coming up had been. The forest roof had kept the brook almost clear of snow, and so the way was one long shining slide. They put the blind forest child on the sled and started, pulling him along by ropes of twisted fir fronds. They had to run very fast to keep the sledge from bumping their heels. The wonderful sandals that Cloud had made did not slip on the smooth ice, and when the children began to slide, the sandals seemed to give the sliding wings. Only wind creatures know the secret of making such sandals. Now the children were going along as speedily as the wind. Hepatica had long since learned her lesson of letting go, and if you had seen her then, you would have thought her only a bright reflection on the ice, so fast was she sliding. The littlest forest child laughed, in spite of his blind eyes, to feel the speed of their journeying, and the wind through clouds' beating wings. That was a glorious slide down from the high cold places of the forest, under the glittering arc of snowy branches. The sun sparkled through all the white forest. The winter air burned their faces, but Hepatica did not feel cold, even without her cloak. It was not yet noon when they left the brook, dragging the sled up its banks over frozen grass and bushes, and started off towards the forest children's village. The forest children, when they had waked that morning, had dimly remembered that Tree Mother herself had put them to bed the night before, and that she had whispered to them that the littlest one was safe, so they were not troubled about him any more, but they were watching for his return eagerly. Cloud began singing as they neared the village, so that the children would hear. Here we are, bringing him down from the waterfall, snatched from the snow witches, safe again home. I and Hepatica found the long way to him. Hi, hi, here we come. You can imagine how the children rushed out to meet them, and how the wind creatures who heard the song came flying, purple wings swooping down from every direction. The tree girl and the tree man heard it too, carried on the clear frosty air, and hastened to see the littlest forest child safe. When Hepatica and Cloud came leaping into sight, drawing the sled with the littlest forest child wrapped so warmly in Tree Mother's sky-blue cloak, it was a wonderful sight. Hepatica's cloud-blown hair was a gleam like a crown with frost from those high cold places. Cloud's purple wings were frost-tipped too, and all the feathers silvered, but the cloak around the littlest forest child shone like a summer sky. The children danced for joy. That is, they danced until they saw their brother's closed eyes. Then they stopped quite suddenly, all their merriment hushed. Tree Man lifted the little fellow up to his shoulder. There he sat with his frost-capped curls and his eyelids glued together. What could they do for him? Cloud told of their journey. They listened breathlessly, and Hepatica wasn't in the cage of the beautiful wicked witch at all, exclaimed the tree girl when it was done. All the children looked at Hepatica wonderingly and shyly. They remembered with sorrow how unkind they had been in mocking her all the autumn. I should say she wasn't in a cage, cried Cloud, proud of his playmate. She was climbing the steep frozen ladder and saving your little brother from the shrieking snow witches. No one could keep Hepatica in a cage. No one will ever be able to keep Hepatica in a cage. The children and even the tree man turned amazed eyes towards the pine tree from which the voice came, for those last clear-winged words were spoken by Tree Mother. They knew her voice, and yes, there she stood against the straight trunk of the pine in flowing white, a wreath of Indian pipes gleaming in sunshine on her brow. The forest children had never seen her when they were so wide awake. They were dazzled and delighted, but the littlest forest child, who could not see her splendor because of his frozen eyelids, ran to her with arms outstretched, crying, "Tree Mother, beautiful Tree Mother!" She lifted him to her bosom and kissed his cold eyelids. They warmed as to the sunshine and opened softly. Then all the forest people saw his eyes shining clear blue again, and were content. She set him down, and he stood hugging her knees, safe and clear-eyed and happy again. Tree Mother unwrapped the sky-blue cloak from about him and held it out to Hepatica. "Here is your cloak, little daughter," she said. At those clear words all the forest people looked at one another and nodded their heads. The littlest forest child had sung the truth after all. Their nods said. Hepatica was in Tree Mother's charge, and never had belonged to the beautiful Wicked Witch. "But don't you need it now that you have come back?" Hepatica asked as she took the wonderful cloak. Tree Mother shook her head. "Run along now and play," she commanded them. "You know that the human is to be trusted, and you have your littlest one back again." As though those words had sounded in their own heads, the forest children turned back to their amusements. The tree girl went back to her tree, and the doll's clothes she was making, and the wind creatures surrounded Hepatica. They did not mean to let Cloud have her all to himself now. They wanted her for their playmate too. They made a chair for her with their hands, and all together mounted on their purple wings, and lifted her up to the tree tops and the snowy forest roof. There she played with them all day. If you could have seen her, then you would have thought her a wind creature herself, and no human at all. She ran so lightly over the snowy treetops, she leapt so daringly across the open spaces, she laughed with so high a gaiety, and all the time Tree Mother's sky-blue cloak swept back like a wing from her shoulders. But she was not a wind creature, for at night, when the first stars came out, in the deep blue of the winter sky, she left her playfellows sleeping in the tops of the trees, cradled on their purple wings, and ran off by herself to Tree Mother's sky house, to which she alone knew the way. Chapter 16. The World Again. And so began a happy time for Hepatica and all the forest people. Tree Mother was back, and the forest was at peace. Hepatica had learned how to take care of herself, but it was blissful to have Tree Mother tuck her into bed at night and listen to her stories of her adventures with her forest friends. The tree girl taught Hepatica how to make her own white winter frock, and they spent many warm hours beside the fire together, sitting while the tree man told stories to the forest children. Soon the buds began to swell, and the earliest signs of spring began to poke through the snow. Fiddleheads and marsh marigolds near the pools, then anemones and violets and hepaticas along the forest aisles. The forest people began making clothes of green and listening for the return of the birds to their homes in the trees. Hepatica helped the forest children to repair and redecorate their little houses with fresh moss and flowers. When summer began, Hepatica put on her old sky-blue slip. This was the color she needed for flying over the forest top with Cloud and the other wind creatures. They ventured farther than ever before in their games, all the way to the sea, where they danced with the waves on the shore day after day. Hepatica had never been so happy. One night, when she returned to Tree Mother's sky house, she found Tree Mother and the littlest forest child sitting on the low couch together. The littlest forest child's eyes were very wide, for Tree Mother had been telling him stories. "Well, Hepatica," said Tree Mother, taking the little girl onto her knee, "the forest told me truly about you. You took good care of my forest people all the time of my absence. But now the forest returns to its old peace and quietness, and you return to the world." Tree Mother looked long at Hepatica with a grave smile. "There are still many worlds ahead of you, little daughter. To explore them, you must first return to the world. Are you ready?" Hepatica's heart beat fast. "Must I really go back?" she cried, dismayed. "Back to the world?" Tree Mother nodded. "Will you have courage, I wonder, to leap back into the world, as you have leapt so many times into my leaf bow house, here without seeing it at all?" "Oh, Tree Mother," begged Hepatica, "let me stay in the forest. Let me be your little daughter always. I don't want to go back to the world." But Tree Mother shook her head. "You will always be my little daughter," she said. "Just leaping back into the world cannot change that. But you belong there now, Hepatica. You are to find your mother there, your human mother. She has never forgotten you." Hepatica was quiet, her head lowered, thinking, but the littlest forest child pleaded. "Oh, don't send her back, Tree Mother. I want her to stay. I love her so very much." Tree Mother led both the children to the window. There they looked right out into the glorious winter sky. It was as though Hepatica stood in it, drinking its frostiness and beauty and greatness right down to her toes. If you had asked her, she would not have been able to tell you whether she was in the sky or the sky in her. "There are still many worlds ahead of you, little daughter." The words rang in Hepatica's mind. Suddenly she felt a cry for adventure in her heart. She understood Tree Mother and was ready to go back to the world. "Then let me go too," begged the littlest forest child. But Tree Mother only smiled at that and shook her head. "Not yet," was all she said to him. "Now it is time to sleep," she said, after they had stood for a long time looking into the star-full sky. The littlest forest child was already asleep in her arms. Tree Mother laid him on the low couch. "Now you, Hepatica, come sleep," she commanded. "But the world," began Hepatica. She had thought she was to leap from the sky house into the world that she could not see. "You shall leap in your sleep," said Tree Mother. "You need to rest and sleep in my sky house before going back. Let the forest think through you." So Hepatica lay down beside the littlest forest child. Then with closed eyes she noticed the gentle swaying of the sky house. She was so drowsy, but she roused herself to open her eyes. Tree Mother was bending over her. "Cloud," Hepatica whispered, so as not to wake the forest child, "can't I say goodbye to him before I leap?" "You will see him in your dreams," said Tree Mother in a low, dreamy voice. "You may explain to him then how it was. Well, the world could not be so very far if Cloud was to meet Hepatica in her dreams there." She was ready to sleep now. But before her eyelids dropped again, she asked one more question. "Tell me, Tree Mother, please, what was it that the wind and the brook and the tree-tops were forever saying to me whenever the tree man spoke? I always listened to him, you see, and couldn't quite understand them at the same time, and they only spoke when he spoke. What were they saying?" Tree Mother smiled. "Yes, I know what you mean, Hepatica. I hear them too, behind the tree man's voice. They are saying only this: be happy. Yes, that was it. Oh, I'm glad you knew, Tree Mother. Good night, good night. With closed, drowsy eyes, she remembered the stars. She was swinging with them as the sky house rocked, out, 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 out into blue space, and back, back, back into Tree Mother's arms. Then out, 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 out. When she swung back again, it was from a very great distance indeed, and in a very deep sleep. And she woke beside the orchard wall. The biggest little girl, the one with the big pink butterfly bow on the top of her curls, was teasing for the second time, better run home and wash Miss Horn's dishes. For yes, it was true, here on this side of the evening light. Not a minute of time had passed since Hepatica had fought back the tears and seen Cloud with her clear eyes. For the times of all the worlds are not the same. Why should they be? Hepatica had spent much time in the forest world, but she had slipped back into this world in the same minute that she had slipped out of it. The children on the orchard wall had not even noticed that she had gone around the edge of the golden evening light at all. So brief had been her absence. I will go home and wash Miss Horn's dishes, she had said, and now with high-held head and clear eyes she ran away from the mocking children up the dusty road towards Miss Horn's gray farmhouse. The rich children stayed on the wall looking after her. She sounded as though she liked washing dishes, said the oldest girl. Yes, she laughed as though it was fun, wondered the boy. They felt a little disappointed that they had not managed to tease her more, but soon they were back at their play, Hepatica forgotten. As for Hepatica, she was very, very happy. How could a child who had played with the wind creatures and been trusted by Tree Mother be otherwise? And had not Tree Mother promised her that she was to find her own human mother? When the dishes were carefully washed and rinsed, dried and put away, each in its own place, and Miss Horn had taught her Hepatica was sent to bed. She did not feel sleepy or tired. How could she after that deep, starry sleep in Tree Mother's leaf-bow house? She lay awake for happiness, looking out of her little dormer window at the fireflies high, tightly dance among the maples in the yard. I will find Mother some time, she was saying to herself, so now I must wash dishes cheerfully. It isn't forever. I'll not be lonely with all the world waiting for me to grow up in it. Oh, I am so happy. And then, quite suddenly, although she did not feel sleepy, she was fast asleep, her cheek pillowed on her clasped hands, lonely no longer, troubled no longer, tired no longer. Epilogue. But did she find her mother, and was Hepatica really a princess? Well, that is not part of my story, but I will tell you, because she was so happy and so brave, and because she had much wisdom in her heart. She did find her mother. It was her high heart, and perhaps the princess in her too, that made her educate herself and work her way out of poverty and neglect. She visited cities and deserts, climbed mountains, and crossed oceans on large sailing ships. Tree Mother had been right. There were many worlds to know. Her travels brought her to a country that felt somehow familiar to Hepatica, though she did not understand the language at first. She understood the whispers of the trees, and she felt that the streams and the rainfall spoke a language she had once known. Hepatica listened to the voices of this land, and knew that she had found the home she was seeking, In that country Hepatica found her mother, the queen, for Hepatica had been stolen in a time of war, and then lost by the soldiers who stole her. And in that home country of hers she met a man, with blown yellow curls and eyes blue as the sea. She did not know that she had seen him before, nor did he remember her, but sometimes he looked at her wonderingly and cried, "Where was it? You pointed out the way to me once. Help me remember." But although Hepatica tried to remember, she was never able to say to him, "It was when you saw me looking in at the school window. That time you got the message from Tree Mother." And then again it was that rainy day in the forest by the brook. Of course Hepatica married this man with the sea blue eyes, and so Tree Mother's promise came true. He found romance in a faraway place. They had a child, too, a boy with wide, friendly blue eyes, and often when he stood leaning against his mother's knee, watching her busy fingers at some work, the gleam of his red gold curls brought back to Hepatica's heart the littlest forest child. But did Hepatica ever see Cloud again, or Tree Mother? No, not with her eyes, but she has felt them near her many times, and when the wind blows across high treetops, or when whole fields of grass bend before her, she sometimes almost sees the flash of purple wings, and many, many times she smiles to herself as if the wind had brought her a message. And then, too, as she wakes in the morning, her dream eyes often close on purple wings, and the laughing glance of her comrade. On those mornings she says to her husband, "I cannot remember my dream, but it was happy, so farewell, Hepatica."